Hey folks, this is Riker with a beginner's guide for Diablo 4 Vessel of Hatred. Whether you're new to Diablo 4 itself or just its expansion, we'll go over some helpful advice, walk you through the game systems, and give you tips on how to be as effective as possible. You can refer to the timestamps below to skip ahead to different sections, because we're going to start with classes. Some people are already wondering which class is best, and well, the answer is it's going to depend on what the current season is. I'm releasing this video in Season 6, but whether you're coming around in Season 7 or a future season, things are always going to change. The devs are always balancing the different classes, adding new powers, adding new items, so class balance will always be different. I think what's most important is that you find something that you find fun to play. That said, if you do want to know what is the best class, for this season, I got a separate video, or I will have a separate video, my class tier list video. Go check that one out. So we'll give an overview of every class, because every class has specific gameplay styles, but they also have unique class mechanics. These class mechanics generally come online at level 15 or level 25 if you are a necromancer. They're going to pop up as progression quests. Just follow the quest, complete it, and through that you're going to unlock your unique class mechanic. And we're going to start with the Spiritborn. This is the new class in Vessel of Hatred. If you played Diablo 3, the Spiritborn plays very similarly to a monk. It's a martial artist, and his powers are fueled by 4 different animal spirits. You have the centipede that is all poison. You have the eagle that is lightning and mobility. You have the jaguar that's fire, high speed, and you have the gorilla, which is very defensive. The Spiritborn is the most customizable class, where you have all these different playstyles that you can go with. And you can also mix and match those different spirit animals. The Spiritborn's unique mechanic is something called the Spirit Hall, where you select a primary spirit and a secondary spirit. These are your spirit animals, and you can pick the same one twice, Jaguar and Jaguar. Every primary spirit gives you some different kind of buff, and every secondary spirit gives you another. Again, this class is all about customization. Then you have the Barbarian. The Barbarian is the melee tough guy, the brutish warrior. You have your spin to win builds here, where you take weapons and go around in a whirlwind, attacking all enemies around you. Lots of bleed abilities. The Barbarian's all about going into the thick of battle. The Barbarian also is the only class that can actually wield 4 weapons at once. He has this walking arsenal of weapons, and he's going to pull out the right weapon depending on what skill you're using. This also means he can stack the most interesting, cool items. The Barbarian also has a weapon expertise system where the more you use different weapon types, you're going to gain buffs with their use. And then you can select one weapon type buff to be in effect at all times, no matter what weapon you're using. Next, we got the Sorcerer. This is your classic mage, and the Sorcerer focuses on 3 elements: fire, ice, and lightning. So you can run a pure lightning, a pure fire, or you can mix and match elements if you want. Especially with the expansion now with patch 2.0, this mix and match playstyle is even more facilitated. The Sorcerer's unique mechanic is that you have these 2 enchantment slots where you can select 2 spells that'll apply passively. Every spell that the Sorcerer has an enchantment slot passive effect. So you're basically getting to select 2 buffs that you always have active on your character. Then on to the Necromancer. The Necromancer is the minion master. If you want to be able to summon an army of skeletons, minions at your disposal, this is the class that's going to facilitate that playstyle the most. Now, the Necromancer is another caster type character, but their magic focuses on death. He has blood powers, he casts shadow magic, and he casts curses. His unique mechanic is the Book of the Dead. The Necromancer is focused on minions, and with the Book of the Dead, you can customize your army of the dead. Do you want skeletons that are holding shields, or that are wielding 2-handed scythes? Or do you want no minions at all? You can choose to sacrifice different minion types to gain different buffs. Next, we have the Druid. The Druid is a shape-shifting nature magic wielder. You can be a werebear, you can be a werewolf, or you can be a classic stormcaster, or some combination thereof. There's also companion builds on the rise if you want to be able to be a minion build. Necromancer's still number 1 there, but Druid is making something happen now. The Druid's class mechanic are Spirit Boons. Kinda similar to the Spiritborn. The Druid has nature spirits, and you're going to make offerings to them. You're going to level up your offering levels with the different nature spirits, and each of these animal spirits has a variety of buffs that you're going to unlock, and you can select 1 buff per spirit, but then you also pick 1 spirit to be your main spirit, and you can pick 2 of that one's buffs. Then lastly, we have the Rogue. Now the Rogue is a very agile warrior, either ranged or melee. If you want to be an archer, Rogue is what you play. Otherwise, if you're going melee, yes, the Spiritborn is also an agile warrior, but the Rogue plays differently. The Rogue is going to be laying traps and also dealing with something called imbuements. The Rogue has access to 3 imbuements. An imbuement is basically, the fantasy is the classic Rogue pouring poison onto his weapon. So you have poison imbuement, you pop your poison imbuement, now all of your attacks are going to deal poison damage. There's also shadow imbuement and cold imbuement, and each of these do different things in different situations. You can be a single imbuement rogue, you can be a double, even a triple imbuement rogue, or you don't have to use imbuements at all. Now the rogue is another class that has access to more weapons than the average. The rogue can wield a ranged weapon, either a bow or a crossbow, and 2 one-handed weapons, be they swords or daggers. And again, depending on what situation, what skill you're activating, it's going to pull out the correct weapon for the correct job. Now the rogue's class mechanic is a specialization. You pick 1 of 3 different specializations. One of them is combo points. With combo points, you enter this sort of rhythm game where you use some skills to build up combo points up to a max of 3, and then when you activate another skill, you're going to spend your combo points, and the more combo points you have built up, the greater the effect. Another specialization is called Inner Sight. This is going to periodically highlight an enemy. It's going to mark an enemy, and if you attack that enemy, you're going to fill up a gauge, and once that gauge is full, you're going to have a period of unlimited energy or mana. And then the last specialization is Preparation, which is all about using your ultimate skill. Every class is able to select 1 ultimate skill. These skills are more powerful than average skills, and they tend to be on very long cooldowns. And what Preparation does is it enables you to reset the cooldown on your ultimate faster, and when you pop your ultimate, you're going to reset all your other cooldowns. Now we're going to talk briefly about skills. Specifically, how to pick skills. We're going to give some advice on how to do so. So you have here your skill tree, and you can expand that with this arrow over here. You start off with your basic skills. Every class is the same. They all start off with basic skills. These tend to be resource generators. You need to put at least 2 points over here before you're allowed to move on. The more points you put in the tree, the further and deeper along you go. Now, generally, you want to put 2 points here and then move on to a spender. Your next node, your next cluster of skills is going to have resource spenders. These are harder hitting skills. So in general, you don't want to invest too much over here, and you almost never want to invest into more than 1 basic skill. Apart from specific circumstances, there are some builds that are going to be basic skill builds, but again, your real objective is to move down into the skill tree to access the increasingly more powerful skills. So most builds will have 1 generator, 1 spender, and then you're going to fill out the rest of your skill bar with utility skills, so stuff that will give you mobility or things that might group enemies, maybe some defensive skills, maybe things that will debuff enemies or buff yourself. As you keep going down the tree, every class is going to have different options here, but the penultimate cluster is your ultimate skills. Now, you can choose to get an ultimate or you can choose to skip it. Regardless, you can only ever pick a single ultimate at a time. Ultimates do take up a skill slot, and in my opinion, the Spiritborn ultimates are very good. The rest of the classes really depends. If you're building around your ultimate, good to take it, but I wouldn't take an ultimate just for the sake of it. It's kind of a trap. But then something you definitely want to take, and you can only take 1, is your Keystone passive. This is the end of your skill tree. Every class has different Keystone passives. You're going to select 1, and ultimately you want the rest of your build to focus and revolve around what keystone passive you take. So you sort of think of the keystone passive as the guiding light of the rest of your skill tree. From there, there's a lot of these passive skills, and passive skills are going to give different buffs of different kinds. So coming up with a build, again, basic principle, pick a generator that is going to synergize, is going to do something for your build that you need. Maybe it's applying vulnerable to enemies. Maybe it's debuffing enemies in some other way. Maybe it's giving yourself a buff. Then you're going to focus around some kind of a spender. You're probably going to have some cooldown powers that aren't going to be using up resource, buff, debuff stuff. And that's sort of depending on what you feel you're needing. Do you lack defense? Well, maybe take a defensive skill. And another thing you want to focus on when coming up with a build is keywords here. So let's say, for instance, you are going to be a crit strike build. Well, you can select this and it's going to see, all right, these are options that'll kind of synergize together, because if you're building up crit strike, well, all these things are related to crit strike. Or maybe you want to make a thorns build. Well, these are all the different things that activate or buff your thorns. Diablo 4 is not a particularly challenging game, so you could make your own build. But if you want to push the highest, hardest content in the game, then you will need a very well optimized build. You might have to rely on following a build guide. But I would encourage you to have fun and start by making your own build. Now, the max level in Diablo 4 is 60. Once you hit level 60, you stop getting skill points, but then you start getting Paragon levels or Paragon points, and you can get up to 300 Paragon points. Now, the Paragon tree, this looks overwhelming at first, but you start off here with just one of these Paragon boards, your starter Paragon board. As you get Paragon points, you're going to plot along on your board until you reach one of these board attachment gates. Once you get this, then you can select a second Paragon board. And every class has close to a dozen Paragon boards to select from. So you're going to select another Paragon board, and then you can rotate its orientation however you want. You apply it, and then again, once you get to the next gate, you're going to apply another one, and another until you have a total of 5 Paragon boards. That's the max that you can have applied at any time, and you do really want to get to 5, not necessarily as soon as possible, but almost as soon as possible. When you're building out your Paragon board, you have a couple priorities. Your first priority is going to be, at least on your starter board, accessing your glyph socket. Every Paragon board has a glyph socket, generally towards the middle, and then apart from the glyph socket, every Paragon board apart from the starter board also has a legendary node. And the legendary node is sort of the theme of the Paragon board. Legendary nodes are generally of secondary importance to the glyph sockets, however. Within glyph sockets, you're going to put a glyph. So by itself, a socket is just an empty slot. You're going to be getting these glyphs while playing the game. You're going to level up these glyphs doing something called the pit. More on that later. These glyphs are exceptionally powerful. As you level them up, they become stronger and stronger and stronger. They unlock secondary effects. They gain buffs based on what is around them in the Paragon board. So you definitely will want 5 glyphs in your build. What you may not necessarily need is 4 legendary nodes. You're going to look through which ones are useful to you and only take a legendary node if it's useful to you. Otherwise, it's okay to use a Paragon board and not use a legendary node and only go with the glyph socket. So again, going back to our priorities here, your priority 1 is to reach that glyph socket and then ultimately be able to grab around the glyph socket enough of these smaller nodes to meet the requirement of your glyph. So here you can see that to unlock my additional bonus, I need 40 dexterity within the range, which is this red color here. So I'm taking these little dexterity nodes in order to get my quota. Once that's online, then you can move on. Again, your secondary importance is going to be your legendary nodes. In some rare cases, maybe a legendary node is so powerful for your build that you'll want to get that before you get a glyph socket. That's okay. And then you move on to another Paragon board to repeat that all over again. Once you've got all of that online, then you work on your next priorities, which will be your yellow glyphs, the rare glyphs. These are a step down in power to the legendary glyphs, but they can still have some pretty good stuff on them. And then your next order of priority will be the blue glyphs, which are not the weakest are just the white ones, the common ones. But again, blue ones, what you tend to do is get the ones that are clustered around the rare nodes that you get. The Paragon board is a really good place to fill in lacking defenses, be it armor, be it resistances. You can also go for things that your build needs, like crit chance. Again, you can keyword search this here. Let's say you do movement and, oh, these give me movement speed, so let me grab those. You want to synergize your Paragon board with your skill tree. Now, another very important thing in order to get the most out of your skills and your Paragon is something called Renown. If you bring up your map, you're going to see that there's a whole bunch of different regions in the game. And every different region has a separate Renown track. So 6 regions worth of Renown to earn. What is Renown? Well, doing stuff in this region is going to give you Renown, whether it's discovering waypoints, completing strongholds, doing side quests, just walking around discovering areas, doing side dungeons within it, or finding altars of Lilith. These are all going to contribute towards your Renown. And what do these Renown do? Well, the secondary bonuses are really powerful. +1 skill point, +1 potion capacity, +1 skill point, +4 Paragon points. This is for every region. If you don't do your Renown, you're leaving behind a lot of power. So Renown is something you only ever need to do once. You do it on one character, you do it one time, and then it's always going to be unlocked. The secondary bonuses, that is, which are the important ones, they'll always be unlocked across all your characters. Now, if you're really fed up and you want to stop, you could stop at the 4th tier. Getting the max obols isn't as important, but you definitely need to get those extra Paragon points. Now, you're going to see here Altars of Lilith. This is something else. It's going to be a chore, but you're going to want to do it one time. You do it one time and it's unlocked for all your characters for all eternity. Altars of Lilith. There's a ton of them in the game. They're these little hidden shrines. And every Altar of Lilith gives you some small buff across all your characters. So if you like hunting for them yourself, you can do that. Otherwise, what a lot of people do is people just go to a website with a Diablo 4 world map that shows all the locations of the Altar of Lilith, and then you do like half an hour of roaming around the world or an hour grabbing all the Altars of Lilith, and you do it one time and you're done forever. Now, Vessel of Hatred adds a new zone, Nahantu. Instead of Altars of Lilith, we got Tenets of Akarat. You do not need to do the Tenets of Akarat. They do not give you anything other than Renown, and you can fill up your Renown doing other stuff. Next, let's talk about the difficulty system. So, Diablo 4 has a total of 8 difficulties. Things have changed since the game launched. You have 4 base difficulties and then 4 torment difficulties. So you have normal, hard, expert, and penitent. While you're leveling 1 to 60, you will have access to these 4 difficulties. Well, technically, to unlock expert, you have to complete the prologue of the campaign, which is very quick. And to unlock penitent, you must have completed the base campaign 1 time. As difficulty rises, monster health and monster damage rises as well, as does the rewards that you get in the form of XP and gold. Now, on your first fresh character in a season, you're not going to be starting off on Penitent difficulty. At level 1, Penitent is impossible. Expert is possible but challenging. But if you want to be efficient, you really want to be playing on the hardest difficulty that you can handle while killing things quickly, which might be normal, and that's okay. But if you enjoy a challenging game, you have the option to raise the dial there. Now, if you're making a second character, an alt, and you're able to twink out your alt in powerful gear, then maybe you can take on Penitent from the start, or at least from pretty early on. Now, once you're level 60, that's when you start unlocking the ability to go into the torment difficulties. Your goal is Torment 1. And to unlock Torment 1, you have to have completed Tier 20 of the Pit. More on that in a bit. Once you are in Torment 1, all of the game is available to you. Every activity that there is to do in the game, you can do in Torment 1. Every reward, every item, everything that you can get in the game, you can get on Torment 1. Higher difficulties will give you greater odds of getting the best drops, but you can still get all the best stuff in Torment 1. Now, the thing with the Torment difficulties, not only does monster life and damage increase over the course of the Torments, but monsters also become more aggressive, their AI becomes better, they hit you more accurately and more often, and you get debuffed. At Torment 1, your armor and your resistances drop. In Torment 2, they drop even more and more and more, and we'll talk more about armor and resistance very soon here. To unlock Torment 2, you have to complete a Pit Tier 35, Torment 3, Pit Tier 50, and Torment 4, Pit Tier 65. Now, Torment 4 is an aspirational goal. It's okay if you never get there. It's okay if you just prefer to play on a lower Torment. Torment 4 is there as a goal to work towards, to have something to do, to always be able to test your build and see as you're making incremental improvements if you can eventually get there. But again, there's nothing in Torment 4 that you can't get in Torment 1. All right, let's talk about items now. Gear. The heart of the game. Gear comes in different rarities. You have normal, those are white items, magic are blue items, rare are yellow items, and then we go on to the ones we really care about, which is going to be your legendary items, that's the brown golden ones, and then you have unique items, which are not necessarily better than legendaries, they are different. So unique items and legendary items are distinct, and your build might use some unique items, but you're not going to just fill up every item slot with unique items just for the sake of having unique items. The difference between a unique and a legendary is that a unique has a specific name like Yen's Blessing here, and these will always have the same stats on them. So if you find multiple pairs of Yen's Blessing, they're always going to have all stat, move speed, all resist, resource gen. That is always going to be the case. The roll will be randomized, but you're always going to get those same stats. Whereas a legendary item, the only thing that stays the same is the legendary power over here. That's the orange text. Otherwise, the stats are randomized, and you're also able to basically craft yourself legendary items. More on that in a little bit. Then there's another tier of item called a mythic. Mythics are unique items that are super duper powerful. They're going to be purple items. If you ever see a purple item, then you should jump for joy because that is a really rare drop and a really, really, really good item. Now there's one more bit of nuance to items, and you're going to see here this item has this little star on it. This is an ancestral item. Ancestral items can be any other item type, anything that is legendary or unique or mythic, but they roll with what's called greater affixes. You can see on my gloves here, I have stars next to dexterity and crit chance because those rolled as greater affixes. So a greater affix is an affix that has a significantly higher roll than you can normally get. It is supercharged. An ancestral item can have any number of greater affixes, from 1 to every affix being a greater affix. Your goal for the endgame is to ensure that every piece of gear you have is ancestral, because not only do they have the greater affixes, their item power is also higher. You can see I have 800 item power compared to 750 here on a non-ancestral. Item power is just a number. It doesn't do anything by itself. It's just an indication of the max rolls that affixes on the gear can have. So the higher the item power, the higher, like the move speed, the all resist, all of these stats can roll on the item. Now there's another reason that you're going to want ancestral items, and it comes down to the crafting options, which we're going to discuss in a little bit. Another note on items is that you can trade pretty much everything in this game other than mythic items or items that you have crafted on. Once you craft on an item, then it becomes account bound. But you can always trade any of your items with your own characters. You can put it in your stash and then make an alt character, and your alt can go grab whatever item. Now let's talk a bit about how to gear yourself. What items do you want to wear? What is an upgrade? You're going to find a bunch of items. How do you know what affixes you want? Well, first off, at the lower levels, you're going to be finding white and blue and yellow items, and in general, your yellow items are going to be upgrades. You can just kind of go by the basics of, well, is the number bigger? Especially when it comes to weapons, having a weapon with the highest damage possible is going to be what you aim for. But then legendary items, always very important. You look at the legendary aspect. Is the legendary aspect something that is useful for your build, or do you want to change your build to work around a legendary aspect? Because legendary aspects can be very significant sources of power. So in general, again, you want to ensure that between the skills that you're taking, you're going to get some synergy with the legendary items that you're going to select. And then similarly with unique items, they're going to be themed around certain specific skills or certain playstyles, and you want to build around that. And that might mean, oh, I just got a really good unique item to drop. Maybe I'm going to change what skills I use to benefit now from this unique item. Outside of that, if you're wondering, what affixes are you looking for? Do you want dex? Do you want crit chance? Do you want lucky hit? Well, it's going to depend highly on what your build is. But let's talk first about defensive options, because those are a bit easier. One thing that you always want to aim for, or you want to try to aim for, is maxing out your resistances and your armor. You need 1,000 armor. At 1,000 armor, you're going to have 85% damage reduction. Now remember we said about those higher torment difficulties. As you go higher in difficulty, you're going to get penalties to your armor and resistances, so you're going to want to make sure that in the difficulty that you're in, you still have 1,000 armor. It's overkill to have more than 1,000. You do not benefit from more than 1,000 armor after the difficulty nerf. Similarly with resistances, by default, your max resistance is 70. There are things that allow you to raise your max resistance, but again, you don't benefit from going over max outside of the difficulty nerfs. So from a defensive perspective, it's always easy to see, okay, well, I don't have enough armor, let me add, or let me find gear with armor on it, or let me put skulls in my jewelry sockets to give myself more armor, or let me get more resistances to max my resistances, or let me put gems in my jewelry to get more of the resistances that I'm lacking. More on skulls and gems and jewels in a little bit. Otherwise, of course, you can get those stats on your items themselves, on affixes. Outside of that, it's hard to go wrong with just getting life, items with life on it. Then damage reduction is a really powerful defensive stat. 9.2% damage reduction here. Stacking more and more damage reduction is very powerful. There's a couple other defensive layers here, including dodge chance. When you dodge an attack, you take 0 damage from that attack. So you can have a build that is trying to stack dodge chance. Another defensive layer that some classes have access to is something called barrier. Barrier is basically extra life on top of your health globe. It's going to appear as a sort of like blue energy shield. Sorcerers, for instance, are able to generate a lot of barrier. And then anytime you take damage, your barrier is going to take damage before you take damage to your health globe. Then block is another mechanic where you have a certain chance to block an attack. And when you block an attack, you take a certain amount of damage, reduced damage from that attack. But outside of armor, life, resistance, and damage reduction, any other source of defense is going to be situational to your build. If your build doesn't focus on barrier, then don't bother with barrier at all. There's one last defensive tool that some classes have access to called Fortify. Fortify is a state that you enter. When you are fortified, you take 10% less damage from all sources. Fortify is something that you build up, and whenever you have more fortify than you have life, then you become fortified. So that can either happen from raising your fortify or dropping your life in the middle of combat. But fortify is something that you lose in equal amounts whenever you take damage. So Classes are going to have different mechanics through which they build up Fortify. So that covers the defense. Now for offense, what are you looking for? Again, you want to have the highest item power weapon you can have to have the biggest damage per second, because with little exception, all of your damage scales off of your weapon damage. There are some legendary aspects, some legendary items, or maybe even unique items that might deal flat amounts of damage, but for the most part, things scale off of your weapon damage. Then every class has a certain main stat. So for the Spiritborn, it's Dexterity. For the Druid, it's Willpower. For the Barbarian, it's Strength. For the Sorcerer and the Necromancer, it is Intelligence. In case I didn't say it, Rogue is also Dexterity. Stacking more of your main stat will increase your damage. Outside of that, there's different situational buffs that you can get, depending on what skills you're using. You might want to go with those. But outside of that, there's things called crit strikes, there's vulnerable damage, there's overpowers. Depending on what your build is, you're going to want to specialize into one of these things. So let's start with crits, for instance. Every time you attack, you have a chance to land a critical strike. And you can increase your critical strike chance via gear, via skills, via other stuff. When you land a critical strike, you then deal critical strike damage, and you can buff your critical strike damage. So some builds are going to be crit builds. Not every build, but some builds will be crit builds, and you're going to want to stack up a bunch of crit strike chance and crit strike damage. And again, this is likely going to be synergizing with your skills. Another type of build is a vulnerable build that focuses on vulnerable damage and making enemies vulnerable with your skills. So vulnerable is a state that you or any creature can have. While they are vulnerable, they take more damage from all sources. By default, that's 20%. But of course, there are ways that you can buff that. So again, some builds are vulnerable builds, and you're going to want to stack a bunch of vulnerable damage. Then you have something called Overpower. Overpower is a little similar to crit, but different. Anytime you attack, you have a 3% chance to overpower. There's nothing you can do to increase that percentage, but there are some skills or effects that will guarantee you an overpower. Then when you overpower, you deal some amount of extra damage. You can just scale overpower damage straight up, like you scale crit damage. Otherwise, overpower damage naturally scales based on how much life you have. Again, though, these are all things that if you're not building for them, you don't want to just start stacking them. You generally want to pick one thing to focus on. Especially in the case of overpower, if you're not building around overpower with your skills, you don't even care to touch it at all. Now, another affix on gear that's going to be very useful is going to be an affix that gives you skill points. Now, normally you can only have a maximum of 5 skill points in every active skill, and generally 3 in passive skills. But you can get gear that gives you extra skill points, allowing you to go above 5 points. And it's very important and very powerful to stack these as well. In general, different item slots have different roles. Your weapon slot is an offensive slot. This is your opportunity to stack a lot of offensive affixes. Your chest and pants are very defensive slots. You're going to be stacking a lot of defensive stats here. Your boots are a mixture of defense with mobility. You can stack move speed on these. Your helm is mostly defensive, but you also have opportunity here to put something like cooldown reduction. Gloves are an offensive slot. You can stack crit strike chance, crit strike damage, attack speed, lucky hit chance. So attack speed and lucky hit chance are other affixes that don't benefit every build necessarily. Some builds do benefit from hitting very fast. And what lucky hit is a complex mechanic, but it's not as complex as it initially seems. So every skill has a certain chance to land a lucky hit. If it lands a lucky hit, it triggers your lucky hit effects. And when you get lucky hit chance on your gear, that is just a buff that you get to the base lucky hit chance of a skill. So if a skill has a 50% chance to lucky hit, and you have plus 7.9% lucky hit chance, then you're not going to have 57.9% lucky hit chance. You're going to have a 7.9% of the 50. So it's going to be what, like 53, 54 that it's going to rise to. You don't have to think too hard on it. Just understand that if you are a lucky hit based build, and by default you're not, you need to specifically have things that trigger on lucky hit. So for instance, right here, you can see lucky hit centipede skills have a 35% chance to spawn a pestilent swarm. So this effect triggers when we land a lucky hit. It'll then do what comes after the colon on lucky hit. So if your build has a lot of lucky hit effects and therefore you want to be lucky hitting a lot, then it's a good idea to stack lucky hit chance in your affixes. Otherwise, you don't care about it. Now, we've been talking about legendary items. It's time to talk about the Codex of Power. You press Y, so every legendary item has a legendary aspect. When you salvage a legendary item, you save its legendary power in your Codex of Power. You now have it forever. And then whenever you find a better rolled version of that aspect and you break it down, you're now going to upgrade your Codex of Power to the higher roll version. Why do you care about the Codex of Power? Why are we collecting all of these aspects? Well, you're going to go over to this fellow here, the Occultist. You can find him in many towns. This is where you are crafting your own legendary items. So you can take a chest piece here, put it in, and now you can select any of these legendary aspects that you have extracted. And you can now imprint that. It's going to cost, when you're low level, it's pretty expensive. When you're low level, I would suggest really just picking 1 to 2 that are really good for your build and going with those. But eventually it's going to become a natural part of your gearing where you're going to be imprinting. Now you can imprint legendary powers either on yellow items or on existing legendaries. You ideally want to be doing it on existing legendaries because yellow items have 1 fewer affix and you cannot imprint upon a unique item. Now, not every legendary power can be imprinted onto any kind of item. You have different kinds of items here. So a helm will accept defensive and utility affixes. You can see here what each of these do. Gloves, for instance, you can have offensive and utility aspects. Amulets are special in that amulets can have anything at all. Defensive, offensive, resource, utility, or mobility. But you're going to see here, so resource aspects can only go on rings and amulets, mobility can only go on boots and amulets, utility can go on any slot, offensive is going to be amulet, ring, gloves, and weapon, and defensive is going to be shield, helm, chest, pants, and amulet. Another thing that's special about the amulet is that when you imprint an aspect onto an amulet, it gets a 50% buff to its power. So generally, whatever is your most important aspect, you want to put on your amulet to benefit from it to the max. Except if you wield a two-handed weapon, because that buff is even bigger on two-handed weapons. So if you imprint an aspect onto a two-handed weapon, its bonus is double. Now, while you're leveling at low levels, I suggest imprinting your most important aspect onto your amulet. Why? Because your amulet is something that you don't really need to change. You can keep the same amulet from level 5 to level 60. It's not the end of the world. You don't want to imprint onto your weapon. That's the last place you want to imprint because your weapon you are changing very often. And you cannot afford to keep imprinting onto your weapon. It's going to be expensive. Now, another thing about aspects, and you can find this in the Codex of Wisdom, is that you don't have to rely entirely on drops. Some aspects can be unlocked via specific dungeons. So for instance here, you see, you mouse over this and it says unlocked by completing a certain dungeon. There are a lot of aspects that you can unlock deterministically at their minimum power by completing dungeons in the game. So every leveling build is going to have some kind of aspect or another that is quite useful for it, and you're going to want to go out of your way to complete a dungeon in the game. Once you complete that dungeon, you unlock the aspect. How do you know which dungeon? Well, it tells you, but you can now pin it on the map. You left click it. It is now pinned on the map. When you go bring up your map, boom, you've got a pin, and wow, what a coincidence, we were right next to it. I did not plan that at all, but wherever it would be on the map, you would have a line drawn to that dungeon. Now, another note about the Codex of Power, this is shared across all your characters in a realm. So if you're playing seasonal, all of your seasonal softcore characters are going to share a Codex of Power. So that means if you make an alt, it's actually easier on your main to go unlock the Codex aspects that you need for your alt. Now you've got some other crafting options as well. Tempering. Now, every item can be tempered. There are 6 temper categories, and depending on the item, you only have access to certain specific item categories, again, except for amulets, which get the full gamut of, 5 of the 6. Weapon tempers can only go on weapons, but tempering an item is consuming some kind of a resource in order to apply a power or another affix onto the item. You have different temper recipes. You're going to find these temper recipes while playing the game. You're going to find higher level versions of the recipes that you have. You can get up to legendary. They start off as blue magic recipes. They can go up to rare and eventually up to legendary. These are all just more powerful versions of the same tempering recipes that you find. And they have a variety of powers on them, and they can be very powerful. You can temper legendary items and above up to twice. The tempers, however, must come from different categories. You cannot select 2 defensive tempers. So you would select one recipe here like Worldly Endurance, you hit temper, and then if you want to apply another temper, you would have to select from a different category like Utility. Now here's the thing, you don't get to select which of these powers within the recipe you're going to get. It's going to randomly roll one of those. If you are unhappy with what you got, well, you have a limited number of tempering attempts on your item. So you can try again and try again until you get what you want, or until you've run out of tempering attempts. Now there's something called it's a Scroll of Restoration, I believe is the name. A Scroll of Restoration will reset the tempering attempts on an item. Tempering your gear is going to be a very important step in increasing your power. And once an item is fully tempered, then you're able to masterwork that item. Masterworking is a lot simpler in that there's no choice to be made. You just hit upgrade. Every time you masterwork an item, all of its affixes are increased by 5% in power, except once you reach ranks 4, 8, and 12, 12 being the max. At those ranks, rather than everything going up by 5%, one affix randomly is increased by a huge percent. Now, we come back to ancestral items. It is only ancestral items that can be masterworked all the way up to rank 12. Non-ancestrals can only be masterworked up to rank 8. Masterworking is an end game thing. You're not doing this until you are in Torment, and masterworking is going to be a very important part of empowering yourself to progress deeper into the end game. If you are unhappy with the crits you've landed with your masterworks at 4, 8, and 12, at any point you are free to reset your masterwork ranks for a gold cost. Then the last bit of crafting you can do is again at the Occultist, and it's called Enchanting. You can select one affix to re-roll into something else. So you would select Impairment Reduction, for instance, and then you hit Enchant, and then it's going to randomly roll 3 new options, or rather just 2 new options, or you can select No Change. Now, if you want to see what options are available to you, you click this over here, and it'll tell you what affix that you've selected can roll into what other affixes. So in general, when you find a piece of gear, you needed to have 2 of the correct affixes. The third affix is okay because you can always re-roll that third affix via enchantment. That said, you cannot roll a greater affix this way. And if you re-roll an existing greater affix, it will no longer be a greater affix. So just be aware of that. All right, there's technically another piece of crafting we can do. We're gonna go to the jeweler now. The jeweler is able to add sockets to gear. Gear might just have sockets on it naturally, but if it doesn't, then you can add sockets via the jeweler. The jeweler can also craft gems. Gems will do different things. In general, you have 3 classes of gems that you want to be using. There's gems that you're using in your jewelry. In jewelry, gems act as defensive options. Skulls are going to give you armor, and all other gems are going to give you different resistances. You're going to use gems to, again, fill up your armor, fill up your resistances. That's what your jewelry slots are for. Then gems also do other things in weapons. A ruby is going to do overpower. So if you're an overpower build, you need to put rubies in your weapons. If you are a damage over time build, you're going to put amethysts. If you're a crit build, you're going to put emeralds. If you are a basic attack build, you're going to go with topazes. If you are a vulnerable build, you're going to go with sapphires in your weapon. If you're an ultimate build, you're going to go with a diamond, and you're never going to go with a skull in your weapon. So each jewelry piece can have 1 socket, and then helm, chest, pants, and weapons, 2-handed weapons rather, can have 2 sockets, and 1-handed weapons can have 1 socket. So don't do what you're seeing me do right here, putting runes in my weapon. More on runes in a bit. You do want to put gems in your weapon. And then between helm, pants, and chest, 2 of those item slots will be reserved for Runewords. And then 1 you're going to be filling with, in general, you're probably going to go with the gem that gives you your main stat. But that takes us to runes. So runes are a system that was added with this patch. You're going to get runes to drop. Runes are components that you put together to create something called rune words. There are 2 types of runes. There's the ones that point up and the ones that point down. The ones that point up are trigger runes. The ones that point down are effect runes. So you can see here, inflict a crowd control that isn't slow or chill. So this is the effect. Whenever I inflict a crowd control that isn't slow or chill, then I can trigger an effect rune, like gain 20% max life for 4 seconds. So you can mix and match any combination here, but you're only allowed to have 2 full rune words, and you can only have 1 of each rune applied. So I cannot have 2 knock runes. If I have 1 knock rune, then my other rune word has to start with a different starter rune like Neo here. At the jeweler, you can also craft runes. When you start to get duplicates of runes, you can use those to craft and try to get higher level runes or different runes that you might be looking for. Lastly, you can also use runes to help yourself craft mythic items. These are those purples we were talking about here. You're going to see that each of these requires some combination of runes, as well as something called resplendent sparks. And resplendent sparks are a little trickier to get. You get a resplendent spark whenever you salvage a mythic, which doesn't happen very often, I'm sure. There's other deterministic ways to get a resplendent spark, but it might depend on what season you're playing in. They often make it part of the seasonal reward. Then one other NPC you want to be interacting with here is going to be the Alchemist. Make sure you're upgrading your potions to the max. Then there are things called elixirs. You pretty much always want to have an elixir running. You're going to find a bunch of these, and as long as you have some that you found, you don't necessarily need to be crafting them. Otherwise, you can craft specific ones. They do a bunch of different things, but at the very least, they give you an XP buff. That's the most important thing, and that's the reason why you always want to have one running. You can have up to an 8% XP buff, depending on what elixir you have. So until you are max Paragon, you are always going to benefit from having an elixir giving you an XP buff. Elixirs can also stack with incense. Incense is more expensive to craft. This is a much later game thing. The thing with incense is that your incense buff is shared within your party. So everyone in the party can have a different incense running, and your incense is going to help your party mates. Well, not just your party mates, anyone around you. If you're at a world boss and a bunch of randos are near you, they're also going to benefit from the incense when you pop it. And this also gives you an XP buff, and the XP buff will stack with your elixir XP buff. All right, let's talk about what activities there are to do in the game. So we already mentioned the dungeons that you do to unlock Codex aspects. Otherwise, you don't have strong reason to do dungeons just like that, though. One of the first activities you're going to want to engage with is something called Helltide. Pretty much always, outside of like a 5-minute downtime, there's going to be a region of the world that is engulfed in red. It's generally going to be 2 regions adjacent to each other, sometimes 3. Inside a Helltide, everything is more dangerous, but a Helltide lasts in one zone for about an hour. In that time, whenever you kill enemies, you're going to be getting them to drop cinders. You collect those cinders, and once you have a certain amount, you can open chests inside the Helltide area. Let's go around to have a look-see. As an example, but you can see in my UI at the top here, this is the cinder count, and this is an example of one of those chests. So this is a chest that's going to reward amulets, a tortured gift, and it takes 125 cinders. So there's different chests that are going to have different rewards, and the entire purpose here, again, is to just go farm up cinders and get whatever rewards that you want. Customized to yourself. Anytime you run into something that has a red aura here, this is going to have cinders in it. So definitely click that for some free extra cinders. If ever you die in the midst of a Helltide, you're going to lose half of your cinders. Watch out for falling rain. This is a good source of death. But in general, you see this monster just spawned and, geez, recording. I'm getting some low frame rates right now, but yeah, lots of dangerous stuff happens in a Helltide. It's very exciting. And as you're killing stuff, you're building up a threat meter. This is like in Grand Theft Auto. You're committing crimes against hell, and the popos are going to be alerted. Once you fill up your threat meter, a whole bunch of enemies are going to start spawning on you. Otherwise, you're also collecting hearts, because you can summon something called the Blood Maiden. This is probably the most important part of Helltide. Lots of events are going to spawn in Helltide as well. The orange circle here, events spawn in the world in general, but they're good to do in Helltide because it'll also give you extra cinders. But the Blood Maiden requires hearts to summon, and it's going to be 3 hearts once you are in Torment difficulty. Before that, it's only 2 hearts. If you are someone who has contributed at least 1 heart, you're going to get extra item drops from the Blood Maiden. Otherwise, this is a free-for-all for everyone in the zone, and you actually do want to hope that people in the zone come and help you out. But this is the altar where you can apply the Baneful Hearts. You do not benefit from applying more than 1 Baneful Heart, however. So ideally, you put in 1, and other people in the region also put in 1. And then it's going to start a fight. Waves of enemies will spawn. It's going to be good XP. It's going to be good drops, a good source of cinders. Then when the Blood Maiden spawns, she is a pretty tough fight. You are probably not able to take her yourself early game. But it's a really fun, cool, and rewarding open world event. General strategy in Helltide is going to be to just farm up cinders until you have about 20, maybe 15 minutes left, and then run around opening all the chests. Now, another thing that you're going to want to do is whispers. You see these icons here, the pink and the reds. Especially while you are in Helltide, you want to synergize and complete whispers in the Helltide. Completing whispers will give you grim favors. Once you've accumulated 10 of these, you can then turn these in at the Tree of Whispers right here for a reward. You're going to get to select between 1 of 3 customized rewards. Now, whispers aren't the most important and rewarding activity to do, but again, they're especially great to knock out while you're doing a Helltide, because you're making efficient use of your time by doing a 2-for-1. Again, this is the Tree of Whispers here, which is where you're going to be doing the turn-ins. Now, periodically on the world map, you're going to see some other events pop out. Some of them are Legion events. Legion events generally aren't super worth doing. There's a lot of waiting for it to spawn. Once the event spawns, there's a lot of kind of running around, from one place to another, waiting for monsters to spawn. The rewards at the end aren't that good. There are some niche situations in which you might want to do Legion events, but for the most part, as a beginner, I would not focus on them. Another event that's going to pop up is world bosses. Now, world bosses you will want to do. You're going to get a warning of a world boss coming out. You do want to head over there when there's maybe 2 to 3 minutes so that you get there on time. World boss rewards could be good, especially when you get their once a week reward. There are multiple world bosses, and for every world boss, you can unlock a once a week reward. Otherwise, we mentioned that there are dungeons, but there are also nightmare dungeons. You're going to occasionally find keys, nightmare sigils. These are going to turn a specific dungeon into a nightmare dungeon. This is going to be a more challenging dungeon level, and in this dungeon you're going to get a lot of masterworking materials. So if you're specifically looking to farm up materials needed to masterwork your gear, doing nightmare dungeons is a great idea. Now, another thing you're going to see in the world are strongholds. They're these red things here. They start off locked. Once you do them, they are unlocked and you cannot repeat them again, apart from on another character. Strongholds are, one, really fun activities, and two, they're really good for leveling. Every time you complete a stronghold for the first time, one specific stronghold, like Alchemist here, you're going to get over 1 level up, no matter what level you are. So these are worth doing on your way to level 60. All right, that takes us to the pit. Now, the pit can be found in Paragon, this city right here, and you open the portal here, and you can select a difficulty level. And it tells you what the equivalent difficulty is. So a tier 15 pit is the equivalent of penitent difficulty. A tier 20 is torment 1. And then to unlock torment 2, you got to do a tier 35. To unlock torment 3, it was, what was it, a 60. The pit is a timed dungeon. No loot drops while you're running through it. You want to be blitzing fast, kill stuff as fast as possible to get to the end. The reason you're doing the pit is to level up your Paragon glyphs. So at the end of a pit run, that is where you're going to be able to upgrade your Paragon glyphs. That's the only way to upgrade Paragon glyphs, so you will need to be doing the pit. Again, the glyphs are a very important source of power. Another event that will unlock as you're running through the campaign is the Kurast Undercity, which you can access from the Kurast Bazaar in Nahantu. And this is a new kind of event. It is a time attack dungeon. It's timed similar to the pit, but it is significantly more involved than the pit. So we're going to go over to it because you can either just open a portal into the Undercity as it is, or you can choose to apply offerings before you do. So you're going to click on this to activate it. And now you can just open the portal straight up, or you can put in a tribute. Now, again, once you're in there, you're going to have a certain amount of time to complete the dungeon. There'll be things in there, monsters that you can kill that are going to extend the amount of time that you have. And your objective in there is to collect, I believe it's called, not tribute, but, well, whatever jargon they decided. You're building up a meter, similar to Helltide, as you are killing monsters, and there are other things on the minimap that you're going to activate that are going to spawn waves of monsters that can give you big globs of progress towards filling up your bar. There are 4 reward tiers on your bar. You want to reach minimum reward tier 1 to get a reward at the end of your dungeon run. And ideally you want to aim for getting all 4, but it's not the end of the world if you don't. The end boss fight has 1 of 3 unique bosses to this game mode, and once you're defeated, you get your reward. Now, prior to going in, you can choose to apply tributes. There are a variety of different tributes, and these will customize the reward that you get and enhance it at the expense of greater difficulty. So if we put this one in, for instance, you can see we are getting a penalty to our time bonus, a penalty to our potion drop, and now we can select a bargain. So you can see here, we get to customize what reward we get at the cost of some material. So if we want to spend Forgotten Souls, now we can get legendary armor, will always possess at least 1 rank of a specific skill. So if you're, as we said earlier, it's important to get, plus to skill ranks on your gear. Well, now you are target farming specific things. It can be skill rank tags, it could be resistances. Legendary armor will always possess a resistance affix, or a class unique. You'll only see unique specific to your class. And again, each of these tributes has different ways to customize the reward. So the Undercity is a great way to target farm specific things that your build is missing. And speaking of target farming, another thing that you can do to target farm is the Infernal Hordes. You will sometimes find these compasses. They're going to drop, you cannot craft them, you're just going to find them. These open up a portal to the Infernal Hordes. The Infernal Hordes is a wave-based game mode. You're going to defeat a wave of monsters. You are in a relatively small arena. Events are going to spawn. It's very chaotic. It's very fun. There's a lot of density of monsters. And once you've defeated waves of monsters, you're then going to be presented with a choice. You have to select one of 3 choices. Each choice has a blessing and a curse, a bane and a boon. And so you're going to be customizing your run as you're going forward. And these are going to, again, customize the challenge as well as the reward. And these Infernal Hordes, again, your objective is to pick up the resource that's falling on the floor and stack as much as possible, because once you complete the boss fight in the end, then you're going to be consuming all of the reward that you got in order to get specific kinds of loot. And you have 3 options at the end. You have a chest that's going to be full of items that have a very good chance of having greater affixes on them. You have another chest that's going to be full of materials, great way to get masterworking materials and other materials. And then another chest will give you gold, excellent way to farm gold. The Infernal Hordes are very, very rewarding. Then we have what are called ladder bosses. So you're going to get a variety of boss materials. So for instance, living steel here. You take living steel to the Hall of the Penitent, and you're going to summon a powerful enemy, one of the ladder bosses. And each of these ladder bosses is going to drop specific uniques. So they each have different drop tables. And so if your build needs a certain unique, then you can go after a specific ladder boss and farm him over and over by consuming these boss materials to summon them. And that's your best way of target farming, again, specific uniques. You can go to websites like maxroll.gg. They have the list of the bosses with their specific drop tables. So if you're looking for a specific unique, you just look up which boss will drop it and then go farm that boss. The ladder bosses are also the greatest way to try to farm mythic uniques. They have a very low chance of them dropping, but it's your best way to farm mythic uniques. Then the last activity is the Dark Citadel. This is a co-op raid. You need at least 2 players to participate in this, and it plays up to 4. This is a massive dungeon. Now, it starts off with 1 wing. Once you've completed one of these dungeons, it unlocks the second, the eastern wing over here. Once you completed that one, it unlocks the final wing, which is going to be in the center. These dungeons, this Dark Citadel raid, has a lot of mechanics to it. It's super fun. It's arguably the most well-designed, elaborately designed system in the game. There are so many different things to do and interact with, and mechanics, such that we need another guide just to go over it. But in short, this is an activity that you're going to want to do once a week, because once a week you get a very good reward at the end of it, a big glob of ancestral items. And if you're wondering, well, how the heck am I going to find someone to play with? Well, the game now has a party finder. If you go to your social tab, you can either list a party or find a party by searching for specific activities like the Dark Citadel here, and you can filter to an extreme degree exactly what you're looking for. Your difficulty range, you can put tags depending on what kind of playstyle you have to ensure that you end up with people that are going to give you a good experience. Now we have another mechanic, and that is Mercenaries. Mercenaries will be unlocking as a quest as you're progressing through the game, and your mercenaries will then be found in the den. Now, you can always have a reinforcement mercenary equipped to yourself. What does that mean? Well, if you bring up your skill tab here, you see your mercenaries. You can have one hired mercenary who's going to follow you along while you're playing by yourself, but as soon as you party up with someone, the hired mercenary will disappear. And then you can have a reinforcement mercenary that's always active even in party play. Reinforcement mercenary is pretty straightforward. You're going to set a trigger condition, such as when I become injured, and then you're going to select a skill that the mercenary will use on that condition. So here, provoke, when I become injured, he's going to come and taunt enemies away from me and give me some damage reduction. At any time, you can change out which mercenaries you have. You're going to collect them all in here. You can just go there. You can hire him as a mercenary. You can enlist him as a reinforcement. And as for the mercenary that you have actively hired, he's going to have a skill tree. Every mercenary has some base effect, and then you build up his skill tree. Again, it's good to find mercenaries that can complement your build in some way. How do you level them up? Well, that is via rapport. As long as you have a mercenary equipped, whether it's a reinforcement or a main mercenary, anything that you do while you have the mercenary equipped is going to build up his XP, his rapport. That's how you unlock the skill points, and then eventually, once you're done unlocking his skill points, you're unlocking bartering upgrades. So, mercs have this bartering system. You go talk to this person here, and you see that they sell stuff. For instance, salvage material cash. Ooh, okay. Otherwise, specific items, and every mercenary has different bartering upgrades. So you will want to eventually level them all up in order to maximize your bartering options, because the more they are leveled up, you're going to get more powerful bartering options. Every day you get one free supply restock. Otherwise, it's going to cost you to refresh their vendor inventory. But what it costs you is the mercenary currency, which you get simply from, again, leveling up your mercenary. Once you've maxed out the rapport, at that point, you're simply going to be getting more of these pale marks right here, which you use to purchase stuff in bartering. Now, another thing that we'll point out that could be helpful for new players in a season is the season journey. If you're kind of wondering what to do, if you're looking for a deterministic path forward to more power, well, you can bring up your season journey. Whenever you complete one of these steps, you're going to get a clump of rewards that'll be helpful to you. And season journey gives you a list of objectives. You don't have to complete all of them. You just have to complete enough to unlock the next step. So if there's something that you really don't want to do, well, just don't do that and do the alternative ones instead. We'll finish up with some miscellaneous stuff. One thing that's very useful to do is to go into your game options, go to gameplay, and then enable Advanced Tooltip Compare and Advanced Tooltip Information. This is just going to give you more information on your affixes when you're comparing items. Something else you might find helpful, go into Sound, all the way down to the bottom here. If you don't want to constantly be hearing, I'm out of mana, I can't do that, I'm out of mana, you can turn off player audio on error or put it to simple to just reduce it. Something else that's an option now, any waypoint, if you right click on it, you set it as your favorite waypoint. Whenever you press T to Town Portal, you will now go to your favorite waypoint. Right click it again to clear it, and then it's going to send you to whatever is closest or however it determines what waypoint to go to. Something else you're going to want to do is equip a pet as soon as possible. You can access your wardrobe from your inventory now. Just click this button here, go to pets, equip your pet, because your pet's going to pick up stuff on the ground, not items, but like crafting materials. It's just a great quality of life. If you don't have a pet in there, then you're going to want to go to the town of Kiovashad. Kiovashad should have somewhere near the waypoint a dog. If you pet the dog, you're going to then get to keep him as a pet. You'll see it appear as a quest, not just any random dog. Another miscellaneous tip, when you die, if you respawn yourself, it's going to deteriorate your equipment and you're going to have to repair it. However, if someone else resurrects you, then your equipment does not deteriorate. So, simple trick there to save some money. Also, in game modes where you have a limited number of revives available, if you get resurrected by a friend, it does not count against your revives. And our last tip If you leave items behind, they're going to get mailed to your stash. You can have up to 10 items in your mail. So you don't want to just not pick up anything and have it all mailed to you, but you don't have to fuss over leaving an item behind. Instead of backtracking 2 screens because you see that star on your minimap, just go back to town and it's going to get mailed to you and then claim your mail. Okay, now that is going to wrap up this video, folks. Yikes, this was very long, but there's a lot of game systems. D4 has evolved a lot in the last year and a half. But I turn the question to you folks, if you got any more beginner tips, drop them off in the comments. Also, folks, if you want some free cosmetics in Diablo 4, from October 8th to November 5th, you can get cosmetics just by watching Twitch streams. There'll be new cosmetics to farm up every week. You gotta watch at least 3 hours a week to earn the cosmetics of the week. You can watch me at twitch.tv/Riker. Also during this time period, if you buy or gift 2 subs, you get this horse, and 4 subs will get you the horse armor as well. Also, folks, we're doing the Patreon banner this year. Anyone who is a Patreon supporter by October 31st at patreon.com/Riker, even at the $1 pledge, will get your name on the shirt. That's gonna wrap up this video. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my supporters. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to join Riker's Raiders for more Diablo content.